Hi everyone, this is Congresswoman Greene, and I want to just take a few minutes to explain to you the National Defense Authorization Act. This is the bill that Congress is going to be considering this week, and right now it's planned for a vote on Thursday. This is one of the most funding bills that we work through as members of Congress. I think it's extremely important. My father was a Navy combat veteran in the Vietnam War. I am so grateful for his service, but I'm also grateful to all veterans who have served, as well as the men and women who serve our country right now. I believe that this bill is so important that it should be a top priority for us so that we can give our men and women in uniform all the tools that they need and treat them the best way possible. There's a lot of great things in this bill. I'm very proud of it for many reasons. One of the things I really like is it gives military members a pay raise, a very good pay raise for the first time in nearly 30 years. It also provides child care, all types of health services. It builds up our supplies of equipment, ammunitions that has been eroded for a very long time. But I want to talk about the very purpose of the National Defense Authorization Act, and I want to explain the reason why right now I am a no vote, and I think everyone deserves an explanation. This is something I've been talking with my colleagues about. This will be no surprise to them, but it's important for me to explain it to my district, who I proudly served, Georgia 14th District, but I also want to explain it to the American people. Now, the National Defense Authorization Act funds the Department of Defense. If you were to go to the website right now for the Department of Defense, you would find their mission, and I want to read it to you right now. It says, "We are your defense. The Department of Defense is America's largest government agency. With our military tracing its roots back to pre-revolutionary times, the department has grown and evolved with our nation. Our mission is to provide the military forces needed to deter war and ensure our nation's security." They make it very clear. The Department of Defense's mission is to deter war. That means to stop it from happening and ensure our nation's security. Our nation's security, the United States of America. I very much agree with that mission. I think it is a wonderful mission. Deter war and protect our nation's security. But let's go a little bit further. Let's talk about what that means. The National Defense Authorization Act is not the International Defense Authorization Act. It's our nation's Defense Authorization Act. But the reason why I'm talking to you today is because right now, within the bill that's 1,262 pages, it contains $300 million for Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is not part of NATO. It's not a NATO ally. Ukraine is not part of the United States. It's not the 51st state like you think it might be for the amount of money the Biden administration and many people here in Washington have sent. I'd like to remind you that $113 billion has been funded for the war in Ukraine. I would also like to remind all of you that every single month, not annually, but every single month, $1 billion of your hard-earned tax dollars goes to Ukraine, and that's not part of the $113 billion. This is entirely separate. $1 billion goes to the government of Ukraine to fund their government, to pay for the people that work in the government, to keep the lights on, to keep Ukraine's government running. Now, that is quite a lot of support. I would also like to express sympathy for what the Ukrainian people are going through. There's many innocent people dying in that war, and war is horrific. It's a terrible thing. I want to also express the very important thing that I say every single time I talk about the Ukraine war, is that the United States' role in this war should be pushing Ukraine and Russia to a peace deal and ending this war. The United States' role should never be funding a war, promoting a war, or fighting a proxy war with a nuclear-armed nation, and that is what Russia is, a nuclear-armed nation. So let me explain to you. By funding the Ukrainian war, supplying them with military equipment, supplying them with ammunition, supplying them with all the tools they need to fight a war. That goes completely against what our Department of Defense's stated mission is on their website. The very mission that they tell you, the American people, the American taxpayers, by the way, that pay for the Department of Defense, it goes against it. Because remember, it says right here, their mission is to deter war. Funding a war in Ukraine is not deterring war. That is promoting and ensuring war. And then also, ensuring our nation's security, that doesn't ensure our nation's security. As a matter of fact, that puts all of our security at risk by fighting a proxy war with a nuclear-armed country, which is Russia. There's a lot of problems with this. We should be promoting peace. We should be ending that war, not paying for it. But right here in the NDAA, which I'm going to walk through in just a minute, I'm going to tell you how this money is funded. Now remember, this is normal. These bills are usually massive, and it contains a lot of explicit detail about how we spend the American tax people's hard-earned dollars. And I want to reinstate the fact that I very much support the military, and I want an NDAA that I can vote for. But there's a few things. Again, $300 million in funding for Ukraine, but also there's funding for travel for abortion. I'm completely against that. No tax dollars should be spent on abortion. That's not what you were paying taxes for. And then also, there is money still in the NDAA for transgender medical treatments, and I'm completely against that too. That's not what our military is for. It's not for people to change their gender, or at least be part of medical treatments where they think they're changing their gender, because you can't change your gender. You were born either man or woman. That money should not be in here either. But the rest of the NDAA is fantastic. It's amazing. It gets rid of a lot of DEI, a lot of woke language. It also gets rid of Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden's policy writers and policy on the way the military has to work. I want to see that gone, but I want an NDAA I can vote for. Now here, I'm going to walk you through the history on why I have a problem with $300 million going to Ukraine. Number one, I have been called a Nazi myself by many people in the media, many people on the left. They say horrible things and call me a Nazi, but yet they support the war in Ukraine. Much of our mainstream media supports the war in Ukraine. The Democrats support the war in Ukraine. The progressives support the war in Ukraine, even though they claim to be anti-war. But I don't support the war in Ukraine, and there's a very good reason. One of the reasons why I don't support the war in Ukraine is because there are actual Nazis, neo-Nazis, fighting the war in Ukraine. As a matter of fact, the Ukrainian army today is filled with them. And this is the history that your media told you about before the war started. They used to tell you this. So here, for example, the neo-Nazi group is organizing on Facebook despite a year-old ban. This was in November 16th in 2020. Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg, he used to ban the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. It says that Ukraine's Azov movement, which the State Department calls a nationalist hate group, is running ads, organizing violence, and exporting its far-right ideas. Oh my goodness. Isn't that what they say about President Trump? Isn't that what they say about Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene? Well, they used to talk that way about real Nazis. They lie about us, but the real Nazis right here are in the Ukrainian army. They're the Azov battalion. You don't hear about this much on the news anymore. Here's one from March 30th, 2022. A far-right battalion has a key role in Ukraine's resistance. Its neo-Nazi history has been exploited by Putin. So you fast forward 2 years later, and now it's Putin's fault, but they do admit that there is a neo-Nazi history and a far-right battalion fighting in Ukraine. That was CNN. Now, never forget, this is the documentary that people have forgotten about and don't want to talk about. Time Magazine did an excellent job on a documentary showing all the truth about the Nazis, the neo-Nazis, and the Azov battalion in Ukraine. When was this? January 10th, 2021. That was right before Joe Biden was inaugurated, and I was just a brand new freshman member of Congress. And Time Magazine used to talk about that. The Azov Battalion inside Ukraine's what? White supremacist militia. White supremacist militia. I'm not for racism. Are you? I'm not. And then we have, here we go, Ukraine's Nazi problem is real. When was this one? This was March 14th of 2020. Ukraine's Nazi problem is real, even if Putin's denazification claim isn't. Ukraine veterans of the Azov Battalion formed a white supremacist and banned from receiving U.S. aid attend a rally in Kyiv on March 14th, 2020. Here they are. This is NBC News. They don't talk about these guys anymore. Now, even The Guardian talked about them. Oh, but this article is more than 5 years old. Neo-Nazi groups recruit Britons to fight in Ukraine. They didn't like it back then. The Guardian didn't like it back then, and they actually talked about these guys recruiting Britons. But now, oh no, it's fine. They said neo-Nazi groups involved in the fighting in Ukraine are actively seeking to recruit British far-right activists. A leading anti-fascist watchdog has warned. So the people that don't like that are against fascist were against the Azov Battalion and the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Here we go, March 20th, 2018. Ukraine's neo-Nazi problem. Kyiv must also contend with a growing problem behind the front lines, far-right vigilantes who are willing to use intimidation and even violence to advance their agendas, and who often do so with the tacit approval of law enforcement agencies. Here's another story when they used to admit that there were Nazis in Ukraine. This was such an issue that one of my colleagues, Ro Khanna, Congress banned arms to Ukraine militias linked to neo-Nazis. Back in 2018, one of my colleagues, Democrat Congressman Ro Khanna, introduced a provision to do that. It was in the big spending bill, a little notice provision in 2,232-page government spending bill passed last week. This was in 2018. Bans U.S. arms from going to controversial ultra-nationalist militia in Ukraine that has openly accepted neo-Nazis into its ranks. House-passed spending bills for the past 3 years have included a ban on U.S. aid to Ukraine from going to the Azov Battalion, but the provision was stripped out before final passage each year. So Ro Khanna, one of the Democrats, was even trying to ban money going to the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Now, let's talk about when money goes to Ukraine. Do we really know where the money is going in Ukraine? We can put all kinds of rules in our legislation and in our language and in our funding bills and appropriations about where money is allowed to be used, and we can control that in the United States. But let me tell you something. When it leaves our country and it goes to fund another country, we cannot control that, and the proof is in the corruption in Ukraine. They have already had a proven track record of not spending our money well, and we don't know where some of that money has gone. That's your hard-earned tax dollars, ladies and gentlemen. So if we write in our appropriation language, no money is to go to neo-Nazis or white supremacists, I don't think we can really trust the fact that it will actually be stopped from going to them, especially given the very real reality that much of the Ukrainian army is made up of neo-Nazis. It is made up of the Azov Battalion. That is who the Ukrainian army is. A lot of it is their identity. Those are their heroes. Let's talk about their corruption. In January 27th of 2023, the New York Times published this article, Ukraine Corruption Scandal Stokes Long-Standing Aid Concerns in the United States. Long-standing aid concerns. They have known about the problems of corruption. We all have. The allegations included reports that Ukraine's military had agreed to pay inflated prices for food meant for its troops. A deputy prosecutor general was fired for reportedly borrowing an oligarch's Mercedes to drive to Spain for a vacation, and a presidential aide accused of commandeering a Chevrolet Tahoe donated to help with evacuations was forced out. See, we already know about the corruption that has been happening and the misuse of U.S. aid. That's your money. And money is fungible. You cannot say, here, we're going to give you $113 billion. We're going to continue to give you more money. Here's $300 million. We're going to give you this money, and we can't really control where it's going once it gets there, and I don't think we can trust it. Let me tell you the problem I have with the $300 million in our NDAA going to Ukraine. It's supposed to go for training of Ukrainian troops in their fight against Russia. But let's talk about what kind of troops they have. Just a few days ago, and you think that this is history, many of you are going to say, oh, they've fixed these Nazi problems. No, they haven't. They still exist. And anyone trying to tell you that they're not there is lying to you. Just a few days ago, on July 9th, 2023, here we have the report that Ukraine celebrates return of Azov commanders held as prisoners of war. Right here. These are the commanders of Azov. These are the neo-Nazis. These are the ones that all of our media and many people here in Washington were calling white supremacists. These are the commanders of the army in Ukraine that got a hero's welcome when they came home just last week. And do you know who gave them the hero's welcome? Zelensky, President Zelensky of Ukraine, welcomed them back with open arms, hugging them as he greeted them and put them on the airplane to take them back home to Ukraine. Now, if our NDAA is going to give $300 million to train troops in Ukraine, it is pretty much guaranteed that our $300 million is going to be training Nazis, neo-Nazis, with commanders like this from the Azov battalion. That's where the money is going. And I'll tell you the wording right here in the NDAA that I want to be taken out. You see, there's a very simple solution for this. Take this out, put it in a separate funding bill. Totally separate. Take it out of the NDAA, put it in a separate funding bill, and I'm sure that over 218 members of Congress will vote for it. Because last Congress, over 218 members of Congress voted for $113 billion to be sent to Ukraine. I didn't vote for that. I don't want to vote to fund a war in a foreign country. I want to vote to fund the defense of the United States of America and our border from aggression like from the Mexican cartels, who are responsible for killing 300 Americans every single day with fentanyl poison. So my request is going to be over and over until this bill comes to the floor. Take this money out. Put it in a separate funding bill. Just take it out, put it in a separate funding bill, and we'll all vote on that bill. I'll vote no, and everyone else, whoever wants to, can vote yes. Take it out of our National Defense Authorization Act. Now, as it stands right now, here's what we have. Section 1223, Extension of Ukraine's Security Assistance Initiative. Section 1250 of the National Defense Authorization Act. Here we go. What it does is it says for the fiscal year 2024, $300 million, this is on line 5 on page 710, $300 million is funding for Ukraine. And it extends it all the way to December 31st, 2025. Line 8 on page 710, section 1224, extension of the Lend-Lease Authority to Ukraine. This is of the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act of 2022. Well, what that does is it strikes for fiscal years 22 and 23 and inserts fiscal years 22 and 24. So we're extending it through 2024. Hopefully the war is over. It should be over very soon. Again, the only role we should be playing is bringing peace. So what does this do? It says the Secretary of Defense shall submit to the Congressional Defense Committees. Here's something else it does. Not only does it give $300 million to Ukraine that is supposed to be for training troops, but it doesn't say that right here. It is also saying that a plan must be put in place to encourage increased total contributions made by allied and partner countries to meet the military's contributions of the United States. So not only are we sending them $300 million in our NDAA, we're also going to be making a plan to increase the total contributions by our allies and by our partner countries. But again, Ukraine's not a member of NATO. And then it says every 90 days, there must be a report written. Every 90 days, there must be a report on all contributions to Ukraine in absolute and relative terms, disaggregated by country in the preceding 90-day period, an update on efforts under such a plan. So not only is this NDAA saying that we've got to give $300 million to Ukraine, but it's also saying that they want to report every 90 days, every 3 months, on how much money all of our other allies and countries are giving to Ukraine. But I'll ask all of you, what does that have to do with the defense of the United States of America, whose mission from the Department of Defense is to deter war and ensure our nation's security? Why should our Department of Defense be writing a report every 90 days to find out how much money all of our allies and everyone is giving to Ukraine? Is that so that they can call them up and say, you better give them more money? Because that doesn't deter war. It actually creates war and ensures more war. That does not ensure our nation's security. That actually puts our nation's security at risk. Because again, this is a war involving a nuclear armed country, and that is Russia. So I'll just wrap it up here because I thought it was really important for all of you to hear this explanation. And I'll remind everyone, I want to vote for the National Defense Authorization Act. I really do. I want to fund our military. I believe that's an important role of Congress. It's actually one of the most important things that we have to do. But I do not want to send money to defend another country's border. I do not want to pay for another foreign war. And I don't want that war to continue. I think the United States' best role is pushing for peace in Ukraine, peace between Ukraine and Russia. That is the best thing that we could do for the Ukrainian people. That's the best thing that we could do for our entire world, for our economies and for our world's security. But the biggest focus I have is our country and our nation's security. Thank you for listening to my explanation. I hope you share this with your friends. And if you live in my district, share this around because I think it's important for all of you to understand my position and the work that I'm doing here in Congress. Thank you very much.